Hello, everyone. So now that you have learned a little bit about Haiti, we are going to continue on and talking about the Latin American independence movements. This is going to be a really crucial time period for them. We're talking the very late 1700s in the case of Haiti, and then everything else in the 1800s. And one thing we have to talk about is the influence of the United States of America. Now, we did not lead any revolutions, we did not finance any revolutions, but Latin American nations, particularly the Haitians, definitely took stock in the fact that we were able to win. And I think we provided a little bit of influence, not as much as other people want to have you say, but the United States Revolution proved that a revolution against a European power could work. The Haitian Revolution would then expand upon that greatly, and not surprising, others would follow. Now, what were some factors that you need to know? Well, one, you have distance. The fact of the matter is that the Atlantic is very wide. It's very hard to get information back and forth, and thusly it gives these countries advantages because it's harder for the parent countries, whether it be Britain or France or in most cases Spain, the ability to sustain a war. It's that hard when they're that far away. Okay, economics also has a huge role in the fact that many of these colonies had developed their own economies, had a landowning elite that were able to run a lot of things, and it put these nations, if you will, in a position where they could break away. And then you had identity. Even though many of the people who lived in these areas were descended from the Europeans, like the Peninsulares or the Creole people, or some of the ones that intermarried, they no longer saw themselves as such, as many people in the United States kind of referred to themselves as the Americans as opposed to the British, even though there were still many British people. Many of these folks saw themselves as Mexican or Brazilian or things along that line, and they wanted freedom. And the other influence is Napoleon. And I know I have kind of a question mark because people are like, wait, Napoleon? Well, Napoleon in the early 1800s wrecked Europe, and most of the powers of Europe had to spend quite a bit of money in order to subdue him and eventually defeat him, as well as kind of gain their own sense of national identity. And it was harder for them to sustain these long distance colonies. Now, the guy that's really at the top, and there's lots of guys I could talk about, and I'm going to just bring up a few that go in addition with Haiti, is Simon de Bolivar. He is referred to as the George Washington of South America, and he is really responsible for the freedom of Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia, which of course takes its name from him. He had always been a freedom fighter. He's a guy that, in very similar fashion to George Washington, didn't necessarily always win all the time. Actually, George Washington almost lost more than he won, but he won when it mattered. And Simon Bolivar was one of those guys that was able to keep troops together, rally. And in the first wave of revolutions against the Spanish that were unsuccessful, he learned a lot in the early 1800s, was able to adapt and reform his own army to begin fighting in 1819. And what's really, really important, and I know a lot of you have kind of been actually wanting to see something like this, he had something that everybody else did not have, and that cats with laser beams for eyes, and really was devastating on the Spanish, and they weren't able to sustain against such a deadly weapon and were forced to flee. Actually, not really, but what he really did have is unity. Early on, he was able to unite the various factions because many of the tribal groups that descended from the Spanish with the intermarrying didn't particularly like each other, and Colombians kind of saw themselves as Colombians and not Bolivians, and it was often hard to get all these groups to work together, at least as far as military is concerned. Bolivar was able to do that. And one of the big turning points was the Battle of Boyacá, which actually you see the national park for it on the bottom there in Colombia. And that was kind of the turning point. It was the turning point in which they were able to have huge victory over the Spanish and really just start to drive them out. Now, what Bolivar wanted to do was to then set up South America, very similar to the United States of America, with these states, with one centralized government. He wouldn't have mind being the president. I mean, he was the president of actually a couple of these countries in the future. But whereas Washington was that special general who was able to succeed as a politician, Bolivar really wasn't. He wasn't able to get the countries to come together, and that's why you see the separation in South America. Nonetheless, he is the kind of major figure in South American independence, known as the Great Liberator or El Liberatore, and Bolivar was really, really crucial. But he wasn't alone. There were a few guys that I can talk about. José de San Martin was able to free Argentina and much of Chile, and actually work together with Bolivar to help to drive the Spanish out of some central areas like Uruguay, Paraguay. Later on, the Brazilians, they were able to break free of the Portuguese and set up their own kingdom under King Pedro. And the other leader was Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. You can see the gentleman on the bottom who actually started the independence movement in Mexico in 1810. Now, he's killed in 1811, but his inspiration led to a very long type of revolution that would last another 10 years after that, and of course kill 400,000 people. But nonetheless, they would be successful. And this would go on throughout the 1800s. And you just get different types of leaders emerging. These nations are breaking free. And really by 1900, just about everywhere except for the Galapagos Islands and some others are free from European rule. Now, something we're going to talk about moving forward is why did Europe come back, and why did Europe not necessarily hold on to these areas as long as, say, areas in Africa or Asia? Well, one, the main power down here was Spain, and Spain wasn't particularly powerful. And after the United States defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War, they really kind of fizzled out. But the United States has taken a very direct role in Latin America, and that goes back to the Monroe Doctrine, in which President Monroe stated that no European should be able to have influence in the Western Hemisphere, and the Western Hemisphere is kind of our zone, and you have to go through us. Now, the interesting thing was he said that is that the United States really wasn't in any position to do anything about it, but the European powers are so preoccupied with dealing with Napoleon, the after effects of Napoleon in themselves, and then later the future exploration of Africa, that they were like, okay, Monroe, sure. But nonetheless, it did kind of work. And a lot of this has been through the United States' economic impact. We expand trade down here, particularly business. The United States would have a lot of business down in Latin America. Now, some is good and some is bad. The U.S. business owners would often try to dominate politics by getting control of much of the tax base and often threatening to leave and forcing Latin American nations to basically become reliant on their companies. A lot of them were fruit companies and things along that line. Really kind of strong-arming them. Now, other more centrally powerful nations, say like a Brazil or a Mexico, would benefit through trade and economic sharing. The other big thing that the United States was involved in was the building of the Panama Canal, which is huge for commerce as well as military. Now you don't have to go all the way around the tip of South America, which is very, very far down there. In order to get around, you can cut through the middle, and this is huge. The United States, of course, under Teddy Roosevelt would build it, and we would have it until about the year 2000 when it was given back to Panama, but the United States still has a presence. And this is something we're going to talk about moving forward, that this presence of the United States in some Latin American nations, it's worked well. Others feel that we're being imperialistic. In many cases, we were, and kind of still are today. So we're going to talk about that moving forward. But now with Haiti and these other revolutions, Latin America is free, and now we're going to watch and see how they develop from there. All right, so make sure you get your comments and questions. I'll see you guys soon.